Hello, welcome to Ask Dr. G. My name is Carolyn Makana, your host for today. Karibu sana, Dr. G.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. G is a relationship expert and is here to help us unpack issues to do with relationships.
Sure.
Lately, or I may not just say just lately, but I mean, at the moment, you will see a lot of stories to do with scandals, sex scandals.
Yeah.
You know, high-profile people
Mm-hmm.
having clandestine relationships,
Relationships, yes.
babies being born out of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
The divorce rate has gone up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like as soon as people get into marriage, that's as quick as they're getting out of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
What's leading to this rise in, you know, infidelity, in issues within marriage, especially sexual issues? What's causing all this?
Brilliant question.
Yeah.
We began a series
Yeah.
some few weeks ago, and we were talking about misconceptions of, rather the misconceptions that are surrounding the aspect of sex.
Yeah.
And that was very general.
Yeah.
First, sex in marriage and sex before marriage.
Okay.
And in that series, we talked about various things that society and probably today's relationships have found ourselves in.
Yeah.
In that foundation that we laid, it brought us to where we are today, on the issues today, as you're saying, that surround marriage.
Yeah.
Before we get probably to the nitty-gritties, I've got about 4 to 5 areas, and there could be more.
Yeah.
There could be more, but I've
absolutely.
brought them down to
Yeah.
about 4
Okay.
that majorly in my talking to many of my protege, I've come to find out.
Okay.
But
Are the main
are
and
the
leading causes?
the leading causes
of
all these things that we find in marriage or in relationships.
Yeah.
But before we get there, allow me to just make a preamble
Sure.
by saying that relationships are meant to be respected and prepared for in the way in which they are meant to be. If it's marriage, you've got to prepare for it.
Yeah.
If it's friendship, you've got to define your friendship.
Absolutely.
And so what I find to be the basic issue as I lay this foundation is the aspect of knowing what sort of relationship we are entering into or we have found ourselves in, just so then we can be able to define and know how we're going to live and lead our relationship.
Absolutely.
Many who enter in this case, we are talking about marriage. Many who enter into an institution of marriage
Are not prepared.
not many of them have prepared for it. More often than not, I talk to my protege and I tell them, hey, listen, we've got 2 things. We've got a wedding and we've got a marriage. A wedding is an event.
Yeah.
It comes
and you will find most people are more focused on the wedding
on the wedding,
and have no clue what the marriage is about.
what the marriage is all about.
Yeah.
And they spend less time to prepare for the marriage, which is a process.
Yeah.
And they spend more time to prepare for the wedding,
Yeah.
which is an event.
Yeah.
And the event comes and goes,
And then you're left with
and
this
you're
thing,
left with this
and you
thing
don't know what
called
to do with
marriage.
it.
And when it begins
just-
to, or rather when you begin to unpack it,
Yeah.
then it dawns on you that you've got a huge responsibility ahead of you. So
And
as
it's
I
not what people thought it was.
Exactly.
Once reconciling what you thought and what is now the really difficult part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I began by saying that
Yeah.
when we talk about relationship, we've got to define what sort of relationship we're talking about.
Correct.
And in defining it, then we've got to understand, how am I going to live it before I enter therein? And how are we going to continue in it as we move forward? That defining part of it ought to be understood very well.
Absolutely.
If you and I, Carol, are going to be friends going forward,
Yeah.
there are certain things that we will have to define.
Yeah.
What's our friendship like?
Yeah, yeah.
What will be our boundaries in our friendship like? What are we going to be doing together as friendship? How do we grow together
How
in
do we
friendship?
communicate?
How do we communicate?
You know, what
At
are
what
we doing
point-
for each other
Exactly.
and what is acceptable, what's unacceptable.
Exactly. At
you
what
know?
point do I reach and say, I have broken a boundary of our friendship?
And then how do we resolve that?
Exactly. And so as we talk about these issues that surround relationship. And in this particular case, we're talking about the marriage relationship. It's all about that proper definition. And then number two, on how going forward, the two of us or the two of those that are in that relationship are going to go forward. So the issues that are now rising up in what you called the sex scandals and everything else arise from that preparation.
Yes.
Not
Or
being
lack
prepared,
of.
lack of preparation, not being able to have been prepared enough
Yeah.
to be in it.
Yes.
And
yes.
so you'll find these 5 things coming up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the first one? Please run us through it.
Okay, fine. There's what we call an emotional or physical gap.
Okay.
You know, you go in there with an excitement.
Okay.
You go in there with this, you know, preconceived,
preconception.
exactly, a
Yeah.
preconception
Yeah.
that this is the dream I've had.
Yeah.
But you see, the problem with many of those who enter therein with masks, because more often than not, when I'm wooing someone,
We're in our best behavior.
when we're in the best of our behaviors, we have masked something that is behind us.
And it's a human thing.
It is
It's a
human, it's
thing.
real.
Yeah.
When we get therein and the mask drops,
Yeah.
when we get therein and we become our real self
Emerges.
emerges,
Yeah.
it dawns on us that, hey, I got myself in something completely
And
different.
then your partner is wondering, this isn't the person I was hoping to be married to.
Exactly.
Who is this person?
And so a gap begins to, you know, develop.
Yes. So what is the reconciliation there?
I'm going to
How-
get into that.
Right.
I just want to mention
Yeah.
these 3 to 5 aspects that surround it.
Yeah.
Then probably we'll get into that one after the other. So there's the emotional gap which begins to create. And then after that, there's also the physical gap. You know, the immediate time that we become emotionally distanced, then the physical aspect also comes to play.
It naturally
It
flows.
naturally
that When
flows.
you're emotionally
Distanced.
then you won't really want to be
Exactly.
close to each other.
The gap creates.
Right.
And when that gap begins to create,
Yeah.
or rather,
Yeah.
it has affected our relationship one way or the
Absolutely.
other.
Yeah.
The second thing that I've come to realize is broken boundaries.
Okay, what does that mean?
Now, in a relationship setup,
Yeah.
there are boundaries that we create
Okay.
within ourselves,
Yeah.
and there are boundaries that we create outside of ourselves
Yes.
when we are out there, but not with one another.
Yes.
Let me begin from within ourselves.
Okay.
You see, Carol, when 2 people enter into a relationship
Yeah.
and they have become one,
Yes.
that hasn't taken away their individuality.
Yes. That's very interesting.
Yes.
That's very interesting because I think sometimes when people think we're married,
Yes.
we must do everything together.
The same way.
You must be my only friend.
Mhm.
If I'm going here, you must come with me.
Yes.
And you will find that one party wants to do that and the other may not want to do that. And then sometimes, interestingly, you'll find a couple who quite enjoy doing that together.
Exactly.
So it's about just understanding, you know, how much time does my partner want to spend with me or not spend with me? What the likes, are they similar, dislikes, and you know how to then find that balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I do my premarital counseling,
Yeah.
there's a session where I do personality tests.
Okay.
And we want
Interesting. Yeah.
exactly. So we
Yeah,
want to
that's very
understand
critical.
exactly.
Yeah.
We want to understand what's your personality,
Yeah.
what's my personality,
yeah.
and how can these 2 personalities complement
Each other.
each other
Yes.
as we enter into the institution of marriage.
Absolutely.
And so in understanding the personality tests, I'll have now to understand what are your likes and dislikes?
Yeah.
What
yeah.
defines you in your personality?
Yeah.
And what areas can I, support you in, and what areas should I, stay
That's very
distant?
interesting,
Yes.
Dr. G,
Yes.
because
Mhm.
when you first meet someone
Mhm.
and when we're in our best behavior,
Mhm.
I might pretend I like doing the things my partner wants
Which
to do.
happens more often than not.
A lot. And
Exactly.
then when the masks fall off, then we're like, I thought you liked eggs. I thought
Exactly.
you liked the way I make my eggs.
Exactly.
And we're like, well, I didn't want to upset you. because
Yes.
you like scrambled egg.
Yes.
And I like you and I don't want to upset you.
Yes.
Then I ate them. But
Mhm.
then down the road, you realize
Mhm.
that, I don't have to put up this show anymore.
Exactly.
I'm just
Let me
going
be
to
me.
be me.
Let me be
and you
me,
know,
yeah.
after a certain period of time,
Mhm.
there's only so much time you can pretend
Exactly.
or put up a show or
Right.
put up a face.
Exactly.
Yeah. yeah.
And
So
I
the
call
two-
it
the
in
two
other
you contact
terms, Carol, I call it in other terms when the novelty of love
falls off.
falls off,
Yeah.
all right? And the real self
Yeah.
arises or emerges, that's when it all begins. So that's the second thing I find being one of the things that bring issues that we see today. The third thing, unresolved marital issues. More often than not, there are many things that we sweep under the carpet. Now, there's no marriage today that you can ever call 100% perfect marriage.
Because we're not perfect ourselves.
None of us are perfect.
No.
The good book says that we're born inclined to sin. So every single day we are struggling to become better. And so with that background, with that understanding, when people are in an institution of marriage, they ought to understand then that I'm dealing with, an imperfect human being that I've chosen to live with, that I can bear with their strengths and their weaknesses. In having strengths, I'll support them in their strengths. But in their weaknesses, I'll bear with them as I seek to help them overcome their weaknesses. But more often than not, we have not been prepared to resolve such. And so many people hide it under the carpet. Many people throw it off the window and they live with these things in them. So what happens is, Carol, is that people are living, tolerating one another. Let's just be and move on. But there's a time that becomes like a time bomb. There's a time it will blow off.
Sorry, let me just interrupt you there, Dr. G. What I was saying earlier is this idea that we have of what marriage is. Then we come in to the marriage, and then we find that our partners are not what we thought they are. And reconciling the two is so critical.
Very critical.
It's very critical because that's a point at which you tip over and transcend now, and you're like, okay, now it's no longer about me feeling in love, having butterflies. It's about the reality of the fact that I married this person who is imperfect in so many ways and so different from me. And it's not about me feeling in love anymore. It's about I have chosen them. So love becomes a choice and not a feeling. Because many people have this notion that love is a feeling, and you're always going to be feeling it.
Carol, let me just be spot on.
Yes.
Love is a principle. Is a principle, is a choice that you make to share that principle with another party.
Absolutely.
Now, where does all this begin from? Is the misconception that people have that we fall in love. That is one of the greatest misconceptions I've seen that has been defining many Hollywood misconception. And sometimes when I do my counseling sessions, I ask young people, so when did you fall in love? Some of them begin talking about 19-something and 2000-something. And I tell them, hey, listen, we don't fall in love. We grow in love. And as we grow in love, we get to be understanding one another along the way. And that growth will be ultimate someday. Not now. But in the process of growing in love, we bear with one another's faults, weaknesses, as we begin to understand each other better. And that's why more often than not, Carol, if I may just say this off the topic, is that many people that have grown in love and have lived together over the years, you'll see some semblance. You'll see some similarities, even in the looks, in the manner in which they represent themselves. Now. Exactly. Why? Because they're growing together, not falling in love. Falling in love is like talking about a wedding, an event.
And
it is a one-off thing.
Together is so critical because there are people who are doing marriage but growing separately.
Exactly.
Growing in their own paths.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's where now that separation now comes in.
Exactly.
And you realize the emotional distance comes in, and then the physical now, because you realize if my person doesn't feel, but that's, I feel like, is there some element of laziness in that, in terms of how much effort you're putting
Effort is the word, and you've used it very well. Whenever we talk about any sort of relationship, each person in that relationship has got to put some effort into it. I've got my part to put an effort into. You've got your part. We've got a part that we have to put effort into as a team. And that makes the difference.
Yes. G. Is it possible for one party to carry the other?
It has happened many times. It has happened.
It's very draining.
But it's draining.
For the other party.
It's draining and risky. When one party seems to bear more responsibility, than the other, then it becomes draining. And that is what will lead to the first aspect that we talk about.
Resentment.
Exactly. Okay,
Resentment.
so that's the third thing. So we've spoken about the unresolved marital issues. We've talked about broken boundaries. Then we also talked about emotional and physical gap. Let me talk about the animal in the room,
Oh,
the elephant,
okay.
social media.
There you go. A big one.
I think for me today, social media has just turned around and it's messing relationships up. Messed it in the sense that every person today, if we can't have proper boundaries that will define
With
how
who we communicate with, how
yes,
we communicate
exactly,
with them.
and how we interact or how we handle social media, then our relationship are in jeopardy in all ways. And you can have another relationship right on your marital bed without you knowing that you have it.
And you don't realize it.
Exactly, don't realize it.
Because also, if you and I find this interesting. The trust issue now, that comes in now.
Exactly.
So one person is accessible. You can access them in terms of what they're doing, their phone. One party can access one party's phone.
Yes.
The other has a password.
The other doesn't have a password.
The other one doesn't have a password.
And you begin wondering, why don't I have access to your phone?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that means the trust issues will begin.
There you go.
Why can't I be able to access your phone when I have to? And why is it that when you've given me your phone, I always have to follow you all through to just know that once you're done with it, I have to get it back. What are you looking for? I can tell it to you. Trust issues begin. So this is the elephant in the room. And I can say this. I haven't looked at the research yet, but I can say this with more confidence. Social media today has played a major role in impacting negatively relationships today.
Absolutely.
And the sooner we make the change, the better. Absolutely. Maybe I need to mention the fifth and the final for this moment before we now break them down one after the other. This is what we call again uncontrolled passions and desires.
Interesting.
You know, a human being is created with what we call higher powers and lower powers.
Okay.
The higher powers are reason, the will, and the conscious. And the lower powers are appetite, passions, and desires. Now, the passions, this is where now the basic thing that attracts us to each other and where it all begins. You know, when I say that I'm attracted to Carol, that is at that level of passion and desire.
Exactly.
The reason and the will has to take you to other questions.
Yes.
Who is Carol?
Yes.
Carol
so that they are all then, reconciled.
Reconciled.
Yes.
But
because if one is more than the other,
exactly,
or they're not balanced out,
exactly,
this is where now we have issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when the lower powers of us as human beings take over the higher powers, they become uncontrolled.
There you go.
And that means that I can do whatever I want as long as I'm satisfying my passions and my desires, and it runs randomly. Yes. We're going to come to that in detail.
Excellent.
As we talk to our viewer. Yes.
Viewers, we will take a break and we'll be back shortly.